Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for visiting the YouTube channel for bestbiblecommentaries.com. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Before I do that, I invite you to subscribe to my channel, like the video, and leave comments down below. So you may have heard recently in the news that some new Dead Sea Scrolls have been discovered, and what I have read about it so far is they look to be fragments of Zechariah and Nahum. Now, when a discovery is made like this, it can take time for information to come out based on who's taking the lead and doing the research. So in this particular case, I don't know if it's the Israeli Antiquity Authority or some other body that's taking the lead, but if you're interested in it, I would encourage you to follow the story in the news, because I'm sure that there will be more information coming out about these discoveries in the next few months and maybe even the next few years. So I'm going to start by answering 3 questions about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then I'm going to be describing some of the things that you see here in the frame. So what are the Dead Sea Scrolls, if someone has heard of them before but aren't really sure what they are? As the story goes, in the spring of 1948, a boy wandered into the ancient ruins of Qumran, which is a community on the northwest corner of the Dead Sea in Israel. And this boy was looking for a stray goat, and he threw a rock into a cave. Now, why would a shepherd's boy throw rocks into caves? I think that what they were doing is they would throw the rock in the cave, and if they heard the rock hit other rock, then they know that the sheep were not in there. So, or goats weren't in there. So when this boy threw rocks into this cave in Qumran, he heard the sound of breaking pottery, and that would be jars like this. He heard rocks hit this pottery, and he heard them break, and he went inside to investigate. And what he found inside this pottery were scrolls that were later shown to be over 2,000 years old. They dated from about 200 years before Christ, around there. Now, these scrolls contain different information. Some scrolls contain information about the community of Qumran that inhabited that location a few centuries before Christ. Some were biblical commentaries. Perhaps some of you might think that Bible commentaries are a new invention. They are not. They have been around for millenniums. And before the time of Christ. I'll show you an example of one in just a moment. And also, most importantly, what were found were Old Testament manuscripts, scrolls and fragments of Old Testament books of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible. So over time, as archaeologists and others investigated and excavated the area, there was a total of 900 scrolls that were found. Over 100,000 fragments were found from 11 different caves. So that's what the Dead Sea Scrolls are, kind of in a nutshell. Second question, why should Bible readers care about the Dead Sea Scrolls? So the Hebrew manuscripts that many popular English translations use is called the Masoretic text. It dates to about 900 AD. That's 900 years after Christ. The Old Testament manuscripts that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls date about 1,000 years before that. So Bible readers and Bible scholars believed and kind of hoped that the copyists, those who would copy the scripture over the centuries, over the millennium, really, we hope that they were accurate in their processes, but now we can take this 900 AD Masoretic text and we can compare it to texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls that dated 1,000 years before, and in part know if our Old Testament texts are reliable. So third question, what did the comparisons show? So they showed that the difference between the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls texts were minor and of no theological consequence. So a lot of the differences between the text or some of them may not even come through in an English translation. It's not something it would make no difference in how the text was translated. Other times it could be a spelling variation. Other times it could be something like the order of words that would really make no difference on the meaning of the text. So those were some of the categories of difference that they found, but nothing of great significance. So what this told us is that Bible readers, Bible scholars can trust the process that the copyists use to preserve the text over the centuries. The study of the Dead Sea Scrolls also informs modern translations, and Bible translations like the NIV and the NRSV have incorporated what's called Dead Sea Scroll readings into their translations, and I'll say something more about that in just a minute. So let me show you this picture here, and I have seen the Dead Sea Scrolls twice. I have seen exhibits of the Dead Sea Scrolls twice, and this is going to be hard to fit in the frame, isn't it? And on one of my trips, and I'll say something more about my trips in just a minute, I got this, which is a replica of one of the fragments found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this is of Genesis. Let me just turn it over here. So this is a fragment of Genesis 1:18 through 27, and about the fourth day of creation. So this picture, the fragment's about 12 inches by 12 inches or something like that. The real fragment is about 4 inches by 4 inches. It's just blown up there to make a decorative piece. But this would be an example. So even though they're called Dead Sea Scrolls, there were some scrolls that were found, but most of what was found is fragments like this. I've described them before as they look like puzzle pieces, singed puzzle pieces. Like if someone took a flame to a puzzle piece and it's kind of singed around the edges. That's what I think a lot of them look like, is singed puzzle pieces. So I have seen the Dead Sea Scrolls twice. And the first time was I went to Seattle, Washington to see an exhibit of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 2006. So I'm going to say a little bit about those trips, and then I'm going to talk about the NIV translation in particular. So I saw a Bible commentary in that exhibit, so I thought I would show you a picture of that. So this is an example of the Hosea commentary that was found in Qumran, and commentaries. There are a lot of commentaries found in Qumran, and because I think that people saw commentaries as kind of an extension of the office of teacher of the church. So God gave to the church different offices, including teacher, Ephesians 4:11 and 12. And so this is just commentaries were basically their teachings written down. So even if the teacher wasn't present, people could still be learning from them, essentially. This was one of the scrolls that I saw in Seattle. So this is a scroll of the Psalms that was found in Cave 11 in 1956. So most of what was in the exhibit were fragments like this. And there's the Genesis one that I just showed you a picture of. So the Seattle exhibit in 2006 was a very big deal. Some of you may have heard about it in the news if you're following these kind of stories around that time. The security in Seattle was intense. There were, I think, a total of 10 different fragments or scrolls that were shown in that exhibit. And the Israeli Antiquity Authority was so worried about security that they flew each fragment or each scroll, each item had to be flown over on its own separate plane, just in case something happened to one of the planes as they were being transported. You would still have all the scrolls and the items of the others because they're all traveling in separate planes. And I remember, so this was happening at the Pacific Science Center in Seattle. And I remember having to go through multiple checkpoints. I think it was 3, might have been 2. I was trying to remember this week. But there were multiple checkpoints that I had to go through just to get into the exhibit. If you were at the Seattle exhibit, let me know. That would be interesting to swap some stories and some memories. So the scrolls in the Seattle exhibit were in these cases that were dark. If you just went up to a case, they were very heavily protected with this very thick fiberglass. There's a lot of security around this. They're kind of in podiums, fiberglass podiums, and they would only illuminate. They were not always illuminated. So their default state was darkness, and then a light would come on at different intervals. And I think, if I remember correctly, the light stayed on for about 30 seconds. And then it would illuminate. The illumination would stop, and it would go to blackness again, and you couldn't see the scroll. And this was part of how the scrolls and the fragments are being preserved. So even though the scrolls were being shown for 105 days at this museum in Seattle, each scroll would only be illuminated for a total of 24 hours during that 105 days, and that's one of the ways that archaeologists and scholars were trying to preserve the scrolls. So I also went to San Diego, California. I think it was a few years later, can't quite remember, but I went to San Diego, California to see another exhibit of the scrolls at the Natural History Museum there. And there were different scrolls. So that was kind of neat that you got to see some different Old Testament manuscripts and some other things. And so there's a couple of things that I wanted to show you in that one. And this was Enoch. So First Enoch has a very interesting following. Some people are very interested in the book of First Enoch, and fragments of First Enoch were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think in part people are interested in First Enoch because the New Testament does reference the book, yet the book's not included in the New Testament as a whole. So I think that sparks people's curiosity. So there's a fragment of Enoch that I saw. And another really interesting one, it's actually not a non-biblical scroll, but it's one of the most fascinating finds at Qumran. It's called the Copper Scroll, and it is actually made out of copper. You can see it here, and there are different pieces of the Copper Scroll. They broke it, I think, in the 1950s, if I remember the story correctly. They broke it into different pieces. So this is a piece of it. And I actually don't know a lot about this one because it's a non-biblical scroll, so I have not done that much reading about it. But what I do know is that it talks about buried treasure, or hidden treasure, I should say. And there's all sorts of speculation as to what the treasure is. Some believe that it's treasure that belonged to the community of Qumran, and they hid it when the Romans invaded in 70 AD. Others believe that it's treasure from the temple, the Jerusalem temple. And so we can't really know for sure. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of, it's been a part of a lot of fiction stories just because it's interesting, and it talks about, millennium old treasures. So that was kind of interesting. So let me show you how the Dead Sea Scrolls affects translation. So depending on what kind of Bible you use, I'm just going to use this one as an example, this NIV study Bible, because it's a popular study Bible and the NIV is a popular translation. At the beginning of this study Bible, where it talks about the translation, it talks about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this is in a section at the beginning of the Bible that a lot of people skip over. So I would encourage you, depending on what Bible translation you use, to look at the beginning and look at the first few pages that talk about the translation philosophy, is sometimes what it's referred to as, and see if it says something about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this section here talks about how the Dead Sea Scrolls are older than the Masoretic text that many English translations use for their basis for their New Testament or the Old Testament translation. And it talks about how the NIV has incorporated some Dead Sea Scroll readings. Now, there's places where the Masoretic text isn't really clear. And so scholars have looked at the Dead Sea Scrolls to see what insight they can glean from those certain passages. And as a result of that, there's some passages and verses in the Old Testament of the NIV that have incorporated Dead Sea Scrolls readings, meaning the translation is actually coming from manuscripts that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the NIV, the last time I looked, it was something like between 20 and 30. So the NIV has incorporated about 20 or 30 readings from the Dead Sea Scrolls. The New Revised Standard Version has also incorporated readings from the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't know all of the translation, the numbers for every major English translation off the top of my head, but usually if you read at the beginning of the Bible, you might have to have a study Bible. It needs to be a Bible that describes the translation philosophy at the beginning of the book or at the end of the book, and usually there's some information about Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, I'll say that because of the King James translation philosophy, that translation will not incorporate Dead Sea Scrolls. Also, another question that I get sometimes is there any New Testament manuscripts found in the Dead Sea Scrolls? And the answer is no. This is a Jewish community that lived around the northwest corner of the Dead Sea about 200 years before Christ. So still about 250 years or a little bit more from the first time any New Testament manuscript would be written. All right. So let me lastly here give you a few book recommendations if this video has piqued your interest. So I'll show you a couple of Dead Sea Scroll books here in just a minute that I like. But if you're brand new to this topic, I think this might be a good book recommendation for you. It's called How We Got the Bible. So there's a few different books that are good that tell the story of how we got the Bible. I like this one quite a bit. It's easy to understand. It's introductory, but it still gives you a lot of depth to talk about the history of manuscripts, Old Testament manuscripts, New Testament manuscripts. It does tell the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it tells other interesting stories about how other manuscripts were discovered too. The Dead Sea Scrolls has a very interesting origin. So does the, I forgot what it's called now. I was just reading about it. The Sinaitic manuscript, I think it is. But it's just there's so many stories of how different manuscripts have been discovered, and it's just really neat to see how God has worked to preserve these materials and how scholars got a hold of them and started studying them, and they're just absolute joy when they discover what they have in front of them. It's really great. So this is a neat book, How We Got the Bible. That's a good introductory book. A little bit beyond that is going to be this one, The Meaning of the Dead Sea Scrolls by Vanderkam and Peter Flint. Now, when I went to the Seattle exhibit of the Dead Sea Scrolls, I participated in a seminar, and Peter Flint and Martin Abegg were two of the scholars who were putting on that seminar. So you go to the seminar and you learn about from these scholars who have studied the scrolls firsthand, and then it was those scholars who led us through our first viewing of the exhibit. It was an amazing, amazing experience that I will never forget, learning firsthand from these scholars who have held Dead Sea Scrolls in their hands. It was just amazing. This is a book I got at that conference. I looked; you can still get it today. It has a lot of pictures. It's readable and accessible, and it just provides a lot of information about the Dead Sea Scrolls, in particular the biblical texts found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And if I ever taught a college class on the Dead Sea Scrolls, this would be the book that I used. So it's called The Meaning of the Dead Sea Scrolls. One other tool that I want to show you that I like is called the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, subtitle, The Oldest Known Bible Translated for the First Time into English. And you'll see the name again, Peter Flint. Martin Abegg was the other scholar that I just mentioned, and Eugene Ulrich was part of this project as well. Now, when you look at reviews for this Dead Sea Scroll Bibles on Amazon, you're going to see some negative reviews up front because there's not a lot of information on First Enoch in this book. Like I said, some people are very, very fascinated with First Enoch, and that's fine. That's great. But apparently in some of the publicity for this book, the publisher advertised First Enoch a lot. And when you look up the section on First Enoch in this book, it's only like 2 or 3 pages. So people were disappointed about that. The vast majority of the comments, though, on Amazon are good regarding this book. And it's just, this is an English translation of the scrolls that were found at the Dead Sea. So if you don't know Hebrew, but you would like to know what the scrolls say, you can use this book, and it has some footnotes in it, so it will tell you about some of the discussion around various verses and passages. It will also tell you a little bit about what English translations have incorporated different verses and different passages into their translation. So it's just kind of a neat tool. I refer to it now and then. It's not a book that I necessarily read straight through, but I just think it's a neat resource. So it comes in paperback as well. So I hope this video has been helpful to you in understanding a little bit more about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and maybe encourage you a little bit to follow in the news about the recent discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's pretty exciting when it comes to biblical scholarship, when it comes to biblical translation, history of the Old Testament and New Testament. It's just really fascinating. I forgot to show you what's in this pottery here. By the way, this is just a replica item of the jars that were found in Qumran, and these replicas you can find online for $20. I looked for this picture, I couldn't find it anywhere. If you know where you can buy it, let me know in the comment section. But this is just a replica item of the pottery found at Qumran, and it comes with a replica scripture inside of it, a scroll. I think this is the Isaiah scroll, a replica of the Isaiah scroll, which is, I think it was the longest scroll found from the book of Isaiah. So if you're interested in having a replica for your study room or your library or your home, then you can get one of these for about $20 online. So anyway, I hope this video has just helped you understand a little bit more about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I thank you for watching it.